What if I told you that some grief never ends? Not because you are weak, and not because you are stuck, but because what you lost was never seen, never validated, never honored. This kind of grief is not like the sorrow that follows death. When someone dies, there is a finality, a ritual, a space that society holds for mourning. People bring flowers. They pause. They offer condolences. Time slows down. You are allowed to cry. You are allowed to feel. But when the person who hurt you is still alive, when they were someone you loved, someone who should have protected you, and instead they shattered you from the inside out, the grief looks different. This is the grief that comes from narcissistic relationships. It is not loud. It is quiet. It is not public. It is private. It hides behind your routines, your work, your smile. It shows up when you least expect it. And when it does, it cuts deep. People might say it is in the past, but it is not. Because the damage still speaks. The loss still echoes. You are not just mourning what happened. You are mourning what never did. The love that was never safe. The apology that never came. The version of you that never got to exist. And because there was no true goodbye, there is no real closure. That is why this grief lingers. It is the wound that never closes. And the world, for the most part, does not understand it. But we will talk about it here. And we will speak the truth. What makes this grief unique and perpetual? Grief from narcissistic relationships is not like the grief you experience after death. When someone dies, there is a clear ending. There are ceremonies, support, and time set aside to process what was lost. Society allows space for that kind of grief. It understands the silence, the tears, and even the anger. People expect you to feel the pain. But the grief that follows a narcissistic relationship is different. It is quiet. It is hidden. It continues long after the relationship ends, and sometimes even while it is still going. This kind of grief is unique because the damage is invisible to others. There are no clear scars. There is no body to bury. The person who caused it is still alive, still active, often still in your life. You might share children. You might share blood. You might be forced to interact, and every interaction becomes a new wound. The grief reopens again and again, not just because you remember the past, but because the pattern continues. People misunderstand this grief. They ask why you are still hurt. They tell you to let it go. They think because the narcissist is not dead, you have the option to fix it. But there is no fixing someone who refuses to acknowledge harm. You are left grieving someone who is alive but emotionally unavailable, someone who never truly saw you, heard you, or respected you. That is a complicated loss. Narcissistic grief lingers because it often includes grief for the self. You grieve who you were before the manipulation began. You grieve the time you lost trying to make it work. You grieve the hope that was crushed, the dreams that were abandoned, and the parts of you that were reshaped to survive. You grieve the version of yourself that never got to be free, and that kind of loss cuts deeper than most. This grief is not linear. It does not follow a pattern. It returns when you least expect it. One memory, one look, one message, one birthday, and suddenly you are back in the pain. It does not matter how long it has been. The loop begins again. And because society does not recognize it, you carry it alone. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." In a narcissistic relationship, the outside events keep repeating. The emotional storms return. That is why the discipline of the mind becomes your anchor. That is where the Stoic path begins to matter. You cannot wait for them to change. You cannot wait for closure. You cannot wait for the apology that will never come. The grief is real. It is valid. It is persistent. And the only way forward is to understand it, prepare for it, and stop expecting the world to understand it for you. The emotional loop. How the mind keeps revisiting the pain. Grief from a narcissistic relationship does not fade quietly into the past. It lingers. It recycles. It loops. One day you think you have found peace, and the next, something small triggers a storm inside you. It could be a photo, a message, a voice, even the success of someone who never had to walk through what you did. Suddenly the pain returns, and with it, the confusion. You ask yourself why you are still hurting, why it still matters. But the mind is not always linear. It holds on to pain that was never fully processed. It keeps revisiting unfinished stories. In narcissistic relationships, the damage is repetitive. You are not only grieving one moment, you are grieving hundreds of small betrayals, gaslighting moments, silent treatments, and emotional withdrawals that built up over time. Each one chipped away at your confidence. Each one told you that your needs did not matter, that your voice was too loud, that your love was not enough. Over time, your nervous system adapted to survive, not to thrive. Now, long after it is over, your body still remembers. Your heart still flinches. Your mind still circles back. This is the emotional loop. And it is exhausting. But it is not weakness. It is a sign of how deeply the relationship shaped you. It is your mind trying to make sense of something that never made sense. You were trained to question yourself. You were taught to walk on eggshells. You were conditioned to believe that if you just did better, loved harder, tried longer, the chaos would stop. That belief takes time to unravel. Epictetus said, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." But what happens when the reaction is no longer in your control? What happens when your body reacts before your logic does? That is what this loop feels like. It is not just a thought. It is a response. It is a pattern that was burned into you through repetition and survival. The pain revisits you because you never got to resolve it. There was no apology, no ownership, no truth, only denial. And the mind does not rest when truth is denied. So it replays. It rewinds. It seeks answers in the places it was wounded. This is the loop. Healing means learning how to interrupt it, to catch it, to recognize it without judgment, to say, this feeling belongs to a part of me that was hurt, but it does not control who I am now. That shift is where power begins. You are not crazy for remembering. You are not broken for feeling it again. You are human. You are healing. But this kind of healing is messy. It is slow. It is quiet. And it happens one loop at a time. The grief from a narcissistic relationship may not disappear, but it can be understood. And when it is understood, it no longer has the same power to define your day or dictate your worth. Radical acceptance V's. The desire for validation. One of the hardest truths to accept is that some people will never take responsibility for what they did. They will never apologize. They will never admit the harm. They will never look you in the eye and say, I was wrong. That silence becomes its own kind of violence, and in that silence your grief stays alive. Radical acceptance is a powerful tool. It means seeing things clearly, without denial, without false hope. It means accepting that the narcissistic person will not change, that the relationship was never safe, and that closure may never come. But radical acceptance is not the same as emotional resolution. It helps you stop blaming yourself. It helps you see the truth. But it does not stop the ache that comes from not being seen or heard. Many survivors wrestle with a deep longing for validation. They wait for the narcissist to one day wake up, look them in the eyes, and say, I see what I did. I know it hurt you. I was wrong. But that moment never comes. And with each passing year, the silence becomes louder than words. That is not weakness. That is human nature. We are wired for connection. We are wired to seek understanding. When someone we love denies our reality, it creates a rupture that is hard to repair. The Stoics understood this. They taught that peace comes not from controlling others, but from mastering our expectations. Marcus Aurelius wrote, the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. That is not a call to suppress your pain. It is a call to reclaim your peace. You do that by no longer waiting for the other person to change. Radical acceptance means no longer chasing closure from the source of your pain. It means facing the truth that what you hoped for will not come. But it also means choosing your own healing, even in the absence of justice. You can still feel the grief. You can still mourn what you lost. But you stop expecting the narcissist to offer you what they are incapable of giving. You learn to give it to yourself. That is the shift. That is the Stoic choice. To stand in truth, even when the world refuses to see it. There is pain in that. There is grief in letting go of the hope that someone might finally understand. But there is also freedom. You are no longer a prisoner of their behavior. You are no longer waiting for a version of the past that never existed. You are choosing clarity over illusion, strength over fantasy. Seneca said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage. Choosing to accept what is true and to stop searching for what will never be given is a form of courage most people will never understand. It is not easy. It is not quick. But it is necessary. Your grief is valid. Your longing is human. But you are no longer required to wait at the door of someone who will never open it. Walk away with truth in your heart. And let that be enough." Real life story. The father who was never heard. He was the kind of man who believed in showing love through action. He worked long hours, saved every dollar, and never missed a single milestone in his child's life. He was there for the first steps, the scraped knees, the birthday parties. He did everything he thought a good husband and father should do. He provided. He stayed loyal. He sacrificed. But in the quiet corners of his home, he was invisible. His wife never saw him. Not really. She criticized more than she praised. She twisted his words. She questioned his motives. If he spoke up, he was too sensitive. If he stayed silent, he was cold and distant. Over time, he began to question himself. Maybe he was the problem. Maybe if he just worked harder, tried more, everything would get better. But it never did. Years passed. The emotional weight grew heavier. He noticed how his child mirrored the same contempt his wife showed. He was no longer just the outsider in his marriage. He was becoming a stranger in his own family. Eventually, the marriage collapsed. The divorce was not just the end of a legal contract. It was the end of a lifelong effort to be seen. And even then, the grief did not end. He still had to co-parent, still had to attend school events where he was treated like a guest in his child's life. Every interaction with his ex was laced with control, with manipulation, with subtle cruelty. And his child, growing up in that atmosphere, pulled further away. This was not the kind of grief that fades. It was the grief of being erased in slow motion. The grief of realizing that everything he built, every memory he thought was shared, had been rewritten by someone else. He was grieving a living loss. Sometimes he would see other families smiling together at a park, laughing without tension, and it would hit him. The ache, the sadness, the invisible dagger that reminded him of what could have been. Not what was lost, but what was never truly there. He tried therapy. He read books. He practiced detachment. He even tried to rebuild his own life. And on many days he succeeded. But the grief would still return. Not because he was stuck. Not because he was weak. But because he had loved deeply in a place where love was not returned. Because he had given everything to people who only took. And there was no one to witness the loss but him. Marcus Aurelius said, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." He lived that. He remained respectful. He stayed calm when he was provoked. He chose presence over vengeance. But even the strongest soul can bleed. Grief from narcissistic relationships is not just about what happened. It is about what never got to happen. The love that was never mutual. The connection that was always conditional. The story that was never allowed to be fully told. He learned to stop hoping for an apology. He learned to stop chasing validation. But he never stopped feeling the weight. Because that weight did not only live in his mind. It lived in his body, his breath, his silence. And that is what we will talk about next. The invisible weight. How it affects your life. Grief from narcissistic relationships is heavy not just emotionally but physically. It changes the way you move through the world. It alters how you see yourself and how you connect with others. You may not even realize how much it has affected you until you start noticing the patterns. The hesitation before trusting. The tension in your shoulders that never goes away. The silence you keep even when you want to speak. This grief does not always cry out loud. Sometimes it shows up as fatigue, as self-doubt, as a low hum of sadness you cannot explain. You wake up tired. You second-guess your choices. You avoid closeness because deep down you are afraid of being used again. This is the invisible weight. It follows you into relationships, into friendships, into professional settings. It can cloud your thinking and rob you of the confidence you once had. The world tells you to move on, to let go. But they do not see what you carry. They do not understand the layers. Narcissistic grief is not just about the person. It is about the impact, the erosion of self-esteem, the emotional instability you had to navigate. The inner world you had to rebuild piece by piece. Stoic wisdom teaches us to become aware of our perceptions. Seneca said, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality." But when that imagination was shaped by years of manipulation, your internal world becomes a battlefield. You start anticipating disappointment. You prepare for betrayal, even when none is there. This affects your sense of identity. You might wonder who you really are without the pain. You might feel lost when you are no longer in survival mode. That confusion is part of the healing, but it is also part of the weight. It slows you down. It makes you cautious. Sometimes it makes you numb. Relationships become difficult. You may struggle to explain your needs. You may minimize your emotions. You might even push people away because the idea of being seen feels unsafe. That is what this kind of grief does. It teaches you to shrink, to hide, to stay guarded. You may excel at work. You may become hyper-independent. You may look like you have it all together. But inside, you are still carrying the memory of not being enough for someone you loved. And that pain can influence everything. From how you respond to feedback, to how you react to conflict, to how you love. Healing begins when you recognize the weight, when you stop dismissing it, when you allow yourself to say, "I am still affected by what happened." That awareness is not weakness, it is clarity. Marcus Aurelius reminded us to ask, "Is this within my control?" Much of this grief was born in a space where you had no control. But now, your response belongs to you. You can choose to release the shame. You can begin to trust again, slowly. With caution, yes, but also with courage. The invisible weight may remain, but it does not have to lead your life. You can carry it with wisdom. You can live with strength. And you can walk forward knowing that what shaped you does not have to define you. Preparation is power. Expect the grief to return. One of the most powerful tools you can carry in life is preparation. Not preparation for success. Not even preparation for danger. But preparation for truth. And the truth is, this grief will return. Not once. Not twice. Many times. The sooner you stop fighting that, the more peace you will find. Grief from narcissistic relationships is not a one-time event. It is a cycle. It is tied to triggers, to seasons, to reminders. You might feel fine for months, even years. Then something small happens, and it all comes rushing back. That does not mean you are broken. It means you are human. It means something real happened, and your nervous system remembers. Stoic philosophy teaches that we should expect the difficult. Epictetus taught that when you kiss your child at night, say quietly, "They are mortal," so that when life shifts you are not surprised. That is not negativity. It is preparation. It is strength. It is the mind creating space for reality. Apply the same thinking to your grief. If you know that birthdays will sting, prepare for that. If you know that contact with the narcissistic person will drain you, do not act surprised when it happens. Build the mental and emotional muscles to meet the moment calmly. You will not always succeed. There will be days you are caught off guard. Days when a memory shakes you. Days when a new betrayal reopens the old ones. But if you already expected it, you will not fall as far. You will not feel as helpless. You will say, "I knew this might come. And now I know how to care for myself in the middle of it." This is not about living in fear. It is about living with wisdom. When you expect the return of grief, you can create rituals for it. Maybe you take a day off. Maybe you journal. Maybe you step away from the noise and sit with your thoughts. You do not numb them. You meet them, like a stoic, with strength, with composure, with honesty. Marcus Aurelius reminded us that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. What is your estimate of this grief? Is it something to avoid, something to resent, or something to understand? Your answer will shape your experience. Preparation gives you control, not over other people, not over the past, but over your own emotional ground. You can walk into the next painful moment with more awareness, more tools, and more dignity than you had before. The goal is not to erase the grief. The goal is to make peace with its rhythm, to stop being surprised by its return, and to be ready when it arrives. Because when you are ready, you are no longer powerless. You become the calm in the storm, not because the storm is gone, but because you trained yourself to stand in it. Self-compassion is the weapon Stoics do not talk enough about. Stoicism is often misunderstood. People think it means being emotionless, unshakable, cold. But that is not what it teaches. Stoicism is not the denial of feeling. It is the discipline of response. It is the art of staying anchored while emotions move through you. And one of the most overlooked tools in that process is self-compassion. Grief from narcissistic relationships is complex. It comes with shame, self-doubt, and sometimes self-blame. You ask yourself questions like, why did I stay so long? Why did I let them treat me that way? Why did I not see it sooner? Those questions do not help. They are echoes of the same judgment you received from the narcissistic person. When you punish yourself, you continue their work for them. Self-compassion means giving yourself permission to hurt without guilt. It means recognizing that healing is not linear. Some days you will feel strong. Other days you will feel broken. And both are part of the process. You do not need to apologize for being human. Seneca wrote that no man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity. For he is not permitted to prove himself. Your pain has given you that chance. The opportunity to grow stronger, to know yourself, to rise without bitterness. But that strength is not found through force. It is found through grace. You cannot fight grief into silence. You must walk with it. And you must speak to yourself gently along the way. Self-compassion is not weakness. It is not self-pity. It is clarity. It is saying, I went through something real. I am still healing. And I am allowed to care for myself without judgment. It means giving yourself space when the grief returns. It means resting when you feel overwhelmed. It means saying no to people who do not understand your boundaries. It means becoming your own protector. Too often, survivors of narcissistic relationships think they have to prove their strength by pretending nothing affects them. They smile. They succeed. They carry the weight alone. But that is not strength. That is survival. Real strength is built in the moments when you pause. When you let yourself feel. When you choose to stop performing for a world that does not understand your pain. The Stoic path is not about hiding your wounds. It is about accepting them as part of your story, and then choosing how to live with them. Choosing not to let them define you. Choosing to meet them with courage and compassion instead of denial and shame. When the grief returns, do not rush to fix it. Sit with it. Breathe through it. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you love. That voice of kindness inside you will become your anchor. Your healing will not be loud. It will be quiet, gentle, steady. But it will be real. You cannot always control when the pain returns. But you can choose to stop punishing yourself for it. That is where freedom begins. The world will not understand, but you still must heal. One of the hardest parts of healing from a narcissistic relationship is realizing that most people around you will never truly understand what you are going through. They see the surface. They see the breakup. They see the family conflict. They see the silence. But they do not see the depth. They do not see the manipulation. They do not see the slow erosion of your identity. They do not see the invisible damage that took years to create and will take even longer to heal. People will say things that sound logical to them, but cut deep into you. They will say, just move on. Let it go. At least they are still alive. They might even ask, have you tried talking to them? These comments do not come from cruelty. They come from ignorance, from a lack of experience, from a world that has not yet learned how to speak about emotional abuse. And when you hear those words, it can make you feel even more alone. But just because the world does not validate your pain does not mean it is not real. You do not need their permission to grieve. You do not need their understanding to begin healing. Your experience is enough. Your memory is valid. Your truth stands on its own. Stoicism teaches us to stop expecting from others what they are not capable of giving. Marcus Aurelius reminded us to ask of everything, what is it in itself? Strip away appearances. Look clearly. What is this person really offering you? Is it understanding? Is it abundant? Is it love? When you stop needing others to understand, you free yourself from another layer of grief. This is not about isolating yourself. It is about protecting your truth. About not handing your story to those who will twist it or dismiss it. You do not owe anyone an explanation for your healing. You owe yourself honesty and space. You owe yourself compassion. There will be times when you are surrounded by people who have never experienced this kind of grief. And in those moments, the loneliness can feel sharp. But remember this: you are not alone because you are broken. You are alone because you are facing something few have the strength to face. You are walking through a kind of fire that many will never even see, and that makes your journey rare, not wrong. Let their confusion stay with them. Let their advice fall away. You have already survived more than most people can imagine. You are already further along than you think. Your grief may not be recognized by others, but it is part of your story, and it deserves your respect. Keep healing, keep growing, keep walking, even when no one claps, even when no one sees. The work you are doing is real, and one day you will look back and realize that their understanding was never required. Only your own was. Conclusion: reclaim your power through understanding. You did not imagine what happened. You did not exaggerate the pain. What you felt, what you still feel, is real. And just because the world does not give it a name or a ceremony does not mean it is any less of a loss. In fact, it is one of the most complex losses a person can endure. The grief from a narcissistic relationship is not a failure on your part. It is a reflection of how deeply you loved, how much you hoped, how much you tried to hold something together that was never meant to be whole. This grief stays because the story was never finished, because the truth was never acknowledged, because the apology never came. And yet, despite all of that, you are still here, still standing, still healing. That alone is proof of your strength. The Stoics taught that while we cannot control what others do, we can always control how we respond. Marcus Aurelius lived in a world filled with betrayal and chaos, yet he wrote about calm, about inner order, about rising above. He chose to focus on what was his to govern: his mind, his character, his choices. You can do the same. You can stop searching for the apology that will never come. You can stop waiting for the moment they finally understand. You can stop measuring your healing by the actions of someone who refused to grow. Instead, you can turn inward. You can reclaim the story. You can say, I was there. I saw it. I felt it. I lived through it. And I do not need anyone to confirm it. I confirm it for myself. That is power. That is peace. That is how grief begins to transform. You may still feel the pain, but now you see it clearly. Now you expect its return. Now you meet it like an old traveler who no longer surprises you. And when it comes, you no longer collapse. You nod. You breathe. And you walk forward with your eyes open. Stand tall. Breathe deep. Walk on. You have walked through fire. You have loved people who used your love against you. You have searched for closure in places where silence lives. And still, here you are, healing, breathing, becoming stronger than the pain. You do not need to be understood by the world to reclaim your peace. You do not need the narcissist to admit anything to validate your experience. Your story is valid because you lived it. And now you get to choose what comes next. Stand tall, breathe deep, walk on. You know the grief will return, so be ready, not afraid. Be prepared, not bitter. Let the grief remind you of how far you have come, not how broken you once felt. Each time it visits, you meet it with more strength, more clarity, more compassion for yourself. When others say let it go, you say I am learning to live with it, not run from it. When they ask why you are still affected, you answer with silence, because you no longer owe anyone a defense of your healing. This is your life now. It belongs to you, not to the person who tried to manipulate you. Not to the voice that once made you feel small. Not to the grief that knocks but no longer controls you. You are not just a survivor. You are a thinker, a fighter, a soul who has chosen to feel the full weight of what happened and rise anyway. You do not need closure. You need clarity. You already have that. And now that you do, take it and move forward. Build your peace. Protect your boundaries. Trust your wisdom. Speak your truth when you must, and above all, be kind to yourself. The world may never know what you carried, but you will. And that is more than enough. Keep going. You are not alone.